Welcome to GeekFest, Ben.
Thank you.
I noticed that you're a first-time filmmaker. Did you go to film school, or what's your background?
No, not at all. Actually, quite enjoyed in terms of the time it takes to make this movie. This was a very in-the-moment idea. So I have been basically working last 10, 15 years in banking. So that's my career. And over the years, moving from banking activities to what is now a big thing, blockchain and digital technologies, and this idea of revamping the market. A lot of the events that are portrayed in the film are actually real. And at that time, I basically decided I need to take some time out and deal with that situation. And I wanted to, in a way, share a little bit sort of, or explain the reason why, but without the usual thing, which is like you send an email or post something on LinkedIn. And so the idea was really to say, you take kinetic animation, which I'm a big fan of, to have sort of animated literature. That was sort of the original starting point. But then when I saw it was out, I thought like, this is really not what I had in mind. And then sort of very quickly it turns into this. And then, yeah, this was sort of as the situation unfolded, making this movie, decided, okay, let's also take artificial intelligence as one of the key production measurements. But up to this point, other than being a teen moviegoer and things like that, I have never done before, and also no formal education in that space.
Is the film based on real events?
Yes, it is. So basically, that was exactly the situation in terms of basically both, my mother passing away at the time, and then having a certain skin disease, basically, which was very difficult to portray. And if you think about at the time I left the bank and always had a big team, and the ability to analyze and research and build tools suddenly was gone. And so with artificial intelligence, there's a lot of things we can actually do. We can, look at the world and make sense of that data if you train it accordingly. And so that was also the process I was going through at the time. And in a way, it is quite interesting. You can very quickly catch up with the doctors who may be saying one thing, and then you can verify and test for yourself. Is this actually true? Does it make sense or not? And have an opinion. And sort of that is really was very important for me to say, I want to be able to do something, not just sit around and, wait for other people to make up their mind.
The film blends philosophy, computer science. How did that come about? How did you choose those themes? The ancient Greek mythology blended with data science and computer science?
This is actually very real in a sense. I was working on a bigger program, particularly around blockchain. And it's very difficult to say, if on the one side, this is how banks have operated for the last 50 years, and now something new comes along, and you want to bring two things together. And it's very, very difficult if you want your normal mode of operations, what you've learned at university, it doesn't really solve the problem. And actually, when I started, a long time ago, I started actually never finished. It's also similar to what was said before in terms of having interest in something, but not necessarily be good at it. I studied actually philosophy and particular logic. And then I realized actually the way, Greek philosophy defined what is truth. How can I say something, and can I, through the language, determine whether or not that sentence is true? That's maybe 2,000-year-old, way of thinking suddenly works to crack this blockchain stuff. And that idea is kind of stunned me ever since. And I'm using this a lot. In a way, the idea is not sort of made up. It is basically my personal way of solving computer science problems. And I still find this is crazy if you think about it, but it is actually true.
Is the character's mother dies? Is that the impetus to him to seek out the digital truth?
It is, in a way, I mean, very personally, to say at that time, I was in Asia working on something, and then my mother died alone, basically, without me actually knowing this. And so you start to wonder, was this a smart choice, But then there's another side to this, which is you want sort of this idea of what is blockchain and digital about? This is like, I can verify whether something is true or not. Yeah? So that's what the computers will do. And that changes a lot. But we have this also for ourselves. Like, can I be my true self, my authentic self in various circumstances? What does it take to be authentic and be comfortable with whoever you find that is you? And Heidegger is a German philosopher. He had this point saying sometimes you need to be exposed to, tragic things like, for instance, death that reminds you that you have a finite life. And if you're not doing what you want to do with your life, you do it right now, then it may be too late. So in a way, it brought these things together where you really think, I need to really change a little bit sort of the direction going forward. Whether it's too late or not, that's obviously debatable. But yeah, in that sense, it's was very important. But it's not so much like asking people, like to feel sorry for about myself, because because I'm sure other people have similar experiences in their life. But for me, this was really an important one and the starting point, this discussion and some of the other work I'm doing at the moment.
This was your first film. Do you have any plans for more films or?
Yeah. So at the after the credits, there's a quick reference to this digital asset creator, and that is actually something we're working on because there's another story added into this in terms of what's next. And I'm working with some colleagues to see if we can put this into a bigger film. So hopefully not just a short film, but something, a normal feature film.
Sven, I wanted to ask you to maybe go a little further in your comment about blockchain being the fusion of philosophy and software. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. Could you give me a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a way, I mean, obviously formulate this in a certain way that I like it, but it's the bottom of it. This is actually not controversial, even though it may sound like it. If you think about how blockchain networks like Bitcoin and Ethereum, etc., work, they have independent computers who can agree on something without anyone really telling them how to do that. And the only way it works is by having these financial assets like Bitcoin, that there's something of value that is sitting, that is orchestrating how these computers work together. And so for this to work, you have to make an assumption that we as humans, we want more money, and we prefer that over less money. So that is baked, if you want, into the computer code. But these assumptions are sometimes not true. And because there can be things where you're saying, I'm happy to make a loss here to make a bigger win there. And if the computers don't know that, you can actually outsmart them. And so when we're saying this is a new technology, it is not a technology. It is a technology with a particular idea of how humans, what their preference system is. And if you challenge this a little bit, then it can work more effectively or less effectively. And only by taking that lens, I believe, so that has to be tested, you can actually make it really work. So therefore, I find this quite interesting. It is really a topic for a geek audience to say, finally, if you want sort of that bit of crazy thinking, actually is really an ability to make a difference and solve some problems that with traditional thinking you couldn't do. So that's what's behind this statement.
Oh, thank you. That was excellent. I wanted to ask you about artificial intelligence as well. To me, artificial intelligence is valuable because it's all been gathered up scraped from the internet as written by humans. And do you feel that the value of artificial intelligence will go down as it starts feeding off of itself? This is an idea that came to me while watching your film, that artificial intelligence, when it starts only having access to artificially written ideas, may start feeding back to itself. What are your thoughts about the future of artificial intelligence?
The difference is now that they are now generative, yeah? They're not creative, but they can create things without being taught about this. It is still a million miles away from a sentient being, but some people say this is only a few years away. So I'm a big believer. This is actually the thing in a way, it will permeate everything. And we need to be very, very careful in terms of company that helps sort of with job searches and CVs. And they have an algorithm, and you need to write your CV with certain terminology so that the algo that selects people selects you. And then have a second algorithm that sort of outsmarts this. And sort of we are like spending a lot of time to manipulating a document when at the end of the day, is that person suitable for the job? But nobody asked that question. And there is a bit of a risk to this, sort of where you get drawn into like these kind of discussion. But as a tool, we see this already. There's hardly any process at the moment where people not trying to put it to use. And yeah, I don't know where this will lead us, but I'm absolutely convinced this is one of the biggest industries for the next sort of decade or so.
I very much enjoyed your film. Are you still a banker?
Yeah, not officially, but I'm looking for interesting subjects at the moment. But I don't want to do the normal sort of boring stuff, but work a lot with blockchain and these kind of assets because we can make a difference. And I think for me personally, then it's also saying how you do it and how you want to go about doing a job. Like will also be, if you want, a bit more selective than maybe in the past.
This is the moderator. Your film is not rotoscoping. It is actual AI. Is this correct?
It's 100% AI, yes, yeah.
And how did you land on the character, the shape, the face, the glasses? We're guessing, some autobiographical information. You wear glasses, he wears glasses, but how did you land on the shape?
Well, it's sort of, I wrote the script, so the story was about me, but then I didn't want to have like a photorealistic me doing this. I thought that would be a bit too cheesy. So I thought like something, halfway through, and that was sort of the outcome. So I just said, working also with a production company, that, it has to be someone with dark hair and glasses. And then they had 3 people and said, yeah, that one. So that was the gist of this. But I do realize sometimes when I saw this for the first time, sometimes you can, obviously, if you look in detail, you can see it's not necessarily like real footage, but sometimes it's amazing what this can be done. And the whole thing was done in the actual production done in a couple of days once we had everything together. So that's another testament to what the technology already can do.
Would you ever consider making the same film again, but with a female counterpart, and then maybe making that story of the female meeting the male that you've created, the character, into a longer film.
This is a very good one. So sometimes I watch this. Would I do it exactly like this nowadays when you have a bit of distance and hindsight? And probably not, because in many ways it is, blurted out and sort of really just almost like giving facts and information that going through my mind. But the character sort of this user, and by the way, just maybe if I can say this, that there's a point why it's also called user. So when you run large scale software programs, you write so-called user stories. So you say, as a user, I want to do something so that I can achieve a certain outcome. And as my job is basically just to make these stories all day long, in a sense, I have to say what user wants, and suddenly that fictional idea sort of becomes almost real. And so as a character for the current project I'm working on is again a character that looks very much similar, also in the name of user. And for me personally, it's this joke sort of that there is a fictional actor called user who's playing other fictional characters called user, so you're kind of going through this meta. But yes, in that case, you will then have companions, sort of see a little bit more of a human's life, so which this short film definitely doesn't cover. And so I think that's a very observation.
What is the future of art and tech fusion?
So this is not so much about saying kind of how it's often being portrayed, right? That, we do our business and then we put nice pictures in the office. Here, this is what I tried to explain earlier, the idea that there is certain ancient concepts, a way of gaining new insights. So I'll give you one example, for instance, it's very difficult sometimes when we have to solve new problems. We have a lot of learning and, ideas how it should work. And then it's difficult to really see what the problem is. And you need to apply your knowledge, but you also need to have a bit of distance. And in Japanese or Buddhism and Zen, they have this concept of mushin konansa, the mind without the mind. So you can look at a situation, but you're not judging by your preconceived conditions. I think this is exactly how blockchain software development has to go. But obviously they don't use the terms, and this is a bit of a more in a mythical way. And for me, I take a lot of concept that things that I read when I was a child suddenly make sense. And I never really understood it, but suddenly, yes, there is a certain truth in this, and it can be helpful for if you want to be more effective or do greater things. And for me, that is what I mean by the fusion. It's like really practically applying what you can learn from art or philosophy to business problems.
Do you yourself own a VR headset? And do you play or are interested in playing VR games? Yes or no?
If I don't own it, I'm very interested. Done a lot of research over the years with companies because, so for instance, like if you do engineering, so I love this. So you can have a full German BMW car with all of this 10,000 parts, and you can put it together, etc. But the reality at the moment is not really sort of how I imagine it to be. So we have to see. But so therefore I don't own it, but I would be the first buyer if it's actually useful and I can like walk around the world and sort of scan everything and get the information. We may get there, but at the moment I don't find necessarily the experience like that great that I would spend that money. But I can understand why everyone is fascinated about it.
Sven, thank you so much for being just a beautiful, beautiful guest. I have our final question. What have you learned about yourself in the making of your film?
So sometimes I think like, God, like a person of my age, should I really speak in those terms? But in a way, something, say, like things like my interest in art or interest in philosophy, I never saw as helpful to have a career. And that's sort of what you put at the sidelines. And suddenly that is one the key to be successful. And that's learning to say that really makes you unique and different is really what makes you successful. And in a practical way, that I must say, was shocking and in a way eye-opening, so that we really should, that's for me at least my conclusion, in a responsible way, but nevertheless try to really pursue our interests. And even if they are not necessarily being, seen, welcome or useful in these circumstances, but you have to find a way how to apply them and make a difference. That's really the essence of that process for me.